Hey everyone, this is David Pike, the MotorCity mechanic. Now in today's video I want to show you step by step how to replace the thermostat assembly on this Jeep Wrangler equipped with a 3.6 liter. So make sure to check it out. Now usually when you open the hood on a Jeep Wrangler, there will be a decorative cover sitting on top of the engine that says 3.6 liter. Apparently someone's worked on this in the past, either an owner or a mechanic. They left it off, and when the vehicle left, they forgot about it, and now it's sitting over there by the toolbox and the customer doesn't know about it. Either way, if you've got to remove it, you just pop it up and pull it forward. There are two hooks in the back where it lines up, kind of pivots. You lower it down and you snap it on these little ball sockets right here. So in order to get to the thermostat, we need to know where it is. In this case, it's under the throttle body, left side of the engine, which is the driver's side on this. Now in order to get access, we need to remove the upper air inlet, and we can do that one of two ways. We could take it off as an assembly where we actually loosen up a band clamp here, we've got some bolts here, a sensor unplug, and we unclip it from the lower air filter housing, or a band clamp, 2 bolt sensor, just take this section off. There's a couple clamps on here that's sometimes hard to get to. Either way, whatever works good for you. But what we're going to be showing is unloosening that clamp, this clamp, the two 10 millimeters here, and then we're going to talk about that air intake sensor that we've got to unplug. Now to loosen the band clamp, all we got to do is grab a Phillips screwdriver and back it off. And we'll do the same thing over here at the throttle body. And now we'll move on to the two 10 millimeter bolts that attaches the air inlet assembly to the radiator fan assembly. Now depending on how many times this vehicle's been worked on, you may have problems where you take these loose, they just spin, they may not even be in there, because the nuts that kind of slide into the radiator fan assembly up under here will start to spin. Sometimes it's from over torquing them, maybe there's some rust on it and it just wants to spin with the bolt, so you might have to fight with that. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take this rubber hose off the air inlet assembly. This hose goes from where the radiator cap attaches on one side to the overflow bottle on the other side. I'm just going to get that out of the way. Now grab the rubber boot that attaches to the throttle body, work that loose. We'll come over to the other side where it attaches to the upper air filter housing. We'll work that loose. Now take care, because remember we still got a sensor that's plugged in. We don't want to just grab this and take it off. We might actually break the connector, wiring, or the sensor. What we can do though is kind of lift up a little bit so we can get access to it. Now that air intake sensor is one of those that gets overlooked a lot, both when you're removing the upper assembly and forgetting to unplug it, and second, when you go to reinstall it, you forget to plug it back in. But we've got something to remind us. If you do that, check engine light's coming on. Now it's only got one lock on it, so you don't have to worry about sliding anything. All you got to do is squeeze. You got to squeeze kind of hard. Doesn't hurt to spray a little WD-40 if you want to kind of lube everything up. There you go. Now we can remove the entire assembly. Now with the inlet assembly out of the way, if you look directly below the throttle body, you'll see a plastic elbow or 90-degree turn there, and the upper radiator hose attached to it. That's your thermostat housing. It's attached with two 10 millimeter bolts. And we've got a clamp that we got to release to take the upper radiator hose off. Now being that we're going to be working on the cooling system, we've got to drain it. Otherwise it's going to make one heck of a mess. Now there's two methods you could use. You could disconnect the lower hose either at the engine or the radiator. When you do it at the radiator, it's only about halfway up on the radiator, so there's still antifreeze in the system. And while we're doing the thermostat, that's the perfect time to kind of do a drain and fill, get most of the old stuff out and get some fresh in there. You could take the lower hose off at the engine. Again, it's not going to take everything out of the radiator. The radiator itself has a drain. Now, this one's a little different than most. The drain is accessed from inside the engine compartment, either up above or down below, and it faces towards the rear, and you turn it and it comes out. Wrangler's different. Now, if you want to drain the coolant using the radiator drain, you've got to get to the front of the vehicle and you got to kind of get up underneath. It's directly below this first cutout in the grill. This one just got a bunch of wiring going from the winch to it, so I can't really show you too well. And there's a plastic rectangle shaped piece of plastic that kind of comes out. That's what you're going to grab. You're going to turn it counterclockwise to open it, and you're going to turn it clockwise to shut it. And there's a little trick I recommend doing, because most of these have not either ever been open or it's been a while. And there's a rubber O-ring inside that can tear. So once you try to back it out and it kind of corkscrews coming out, it can damage that O-ring. I like to use a little bit of WD-40. Let me see if I can position the camera where I can actually show you this a little bit better. Now this is an aftermarket bumper, so I've got a little more access here. The factory ones have a belly pan that kind of go up under a little bit, so it's a little hard to get to. But if you look right here in this corner, it's real hard to see. I'll try to just touch it with my finger. There's a drain. That's the drain that we're going to be trying to use to remove the coolant. Now here's another view of that drain. I'm going to point it out with the screwdriver because it's kind of hard to get up in there. Remember, we turn it counterclockwise to drain it and clockwise to close it. And at the bottom of that is a little nipple or drain, a little piece of pipe with a hole in the bottom of it. That's where the antifreeze is going to come out. That's where I like to spray some WD-40 to lube the O-ring. So again, turn it counterclockwise, and you may pull out slightly with it if you're using a pair of pliers while doing this. So I'm going to grab my WD-40, I'm going to insert the nozzle or the tip up inside the hole and spray. And there you go. So I'm going to reach up in there with a pair of pliers, grab a hold of it the best I can, and start to rotate it. Now obviously if you're draining it, make sure you've got something to collect it. This right here is a mortar mixing tray. You can buy these at Home Depot and Lowe's. They've got a good little size to them. So that way when I'm opening something up and it's splattering maybe on the front diff or something, I can collect most of it instead of a small round container. These big rectangular ones work great and they don't cost a lot. Now with the drain open, it may kind of go slow at first. What you can do to speed that up is open up the radiator cap. Now if the antifreeze draining, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the clamp on the upper radiator hose at the thermostat. If it's still factory, no one's really changed things under the hood, they haven't changed the clamps out, it should look like one of these. These are spring loaded where you actually squeeze in and you kind of slide it off. That's what we're going to be working on, but at the thermostat side. Now these tools work great for that. There is a dish side and a kind of a U-shaped portion, and each one corresponds to a part of that spring clamp. If not, you can use some pliers, maybe even some larger needle nose. It really just depends because there's a lot of tension on it, and these tools work great. You can buy these just about anywhere. But again, we're going to be doing it at the thermostat housing. So now I'm going to grab my tool, position it on the clamp, and then squeeze. At that point, I can actually work it off the thermostat housing and get it further down on the hose. Now the hose may or may not just slide off. You may be able to twist it, and that's enough to free it up. If not, they make these special tools here, hose picks, where you can actually literally get between the hose and that thermostat housing and kind of work it around. Kind of break the seal loose because it's been on there for a long period of time. They don't always want to just come off. So at this point, we should be able to grab the hose and start working it off. Now, one thing to keep in mind, that pan that you've got under the radiator, capturing the antifreeze that's coming out, you may want to kind of scoot it up under the engine because you may have some come out when you take this hose off. And now we can go ahead and move on to removing the two 10mm bolts. So I'll go ahead and take the upper bolt off. And then the lower. At that point, I can grab the thermostat assembly and kind of snatch on it a little bit and remove it. And that right there is the thermostat and housing assembly. And this is the replacement. Now this one's aftermarket. The Mopar ones are currently on back order. If you go to a dealer and they've got a bunch, usually they're aftermarket being sold with the Mopar part number, but they're giving you the Mopar warranty. So again, I don't have a lot of problems with using the aftermarket ones. It's got the rubber seal on here, It's got an updated thermostat because there's a rubber lip on the thermostat itself to help with the sealing. And if you look right here, it's actually a bleeder. The bleeder will help remove the air that's on the backside that gets trapped in the engine. Usually you let the thermostat get hot and open up, then the air kind of goes through the system. This one you can open up the bleeder and it actually comes out that little port right there. So it aids in the bleeding of the system. This one's a little harder to get to the bleeder because of where it's at. You can't just get straight down on it. You got to kind of get it from the side. But I'll show you how to do that once we get it back installed. For now, we need to clean up the surface. It's got an aluminum portion that this bolts to, so we might get our Scotch lock or abrasive wheel and kind of clean up the surface where it's mounting. So if you look right here, the old thermostat is still stuck to the timing cover. So you got to make sure you get that off. Again, we're going to get in there with our die grinder. You may have some fine sandpaper, something to kind of clean that surface up a little bit. Now if the surface cleaned, we're ready to install the aftermarket housing. Now there is a torque spec for the 10mm bolts. That's 106 inch-pounds. 106 inch-pounds or 12 Newton-meters. Don't go foot-pounds or you're going to break something. Or you could just snug it up by hand. I want to leave that up to you. I'm just going to grab it, kind of line it up, and start the first fastener. And then grab your last one, line it up. So now we're ready for the upper radiator hose. Slide it down on there. And we've got to deal with the clamp again. And there you have it. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to close the drain on the radiator if you went for that option, or attach whichever one of the lower hoses you disconnected, either at the radiator or the engine. We need to go ahead and reinstall all that or shut the valve. So at this point we're ready to put antifreeze into the system, and there's a couple different methods. If you've got one of those air evac system that hooks up to compressed air, you can actually draw a vacuum on the system and it actually collapses the hoses. And when you're ready, it actually sucks the fluid into the engine, or we could just open up the bleeder. Either way, what I recommend doing is try to get as much air out as possible. On the bleeder one, we're gonna open it up. We're gonna put coolant into the system. When it comes out the bleeder, we shut it, start the vehicle once we got the air inlet on, and we're gonna kind of monitor the temp on the gauge, or with a scanner. We wanna see the thermostat open. We'll let it cool off. We'll recheck the level, top off, even open the bleeder again if we need to. Now here is the old one, so I can show you what that bleeder is all about. Now technically you can get on there with a screwdriver, but because of where that throttle body is, you can't. So these 90-degree screwdrivers work perfect. You can sit it on there, you can actually break it loose. And then it's where you can actually use your fingers to back it off. You don't have to take it all the way off. Just take it up a good portion, and it actually will have coolant start to come out. And when you're ready, you just kind of snug it down by hand. Use your tool, don't over tighten in it. Just snug it up. So that's what we're going to be using, and this is kind of a must-have without having to remove the throttle body. So right now I'm going to reach down in there. I'm going to open up that bleeder screw. Now take care, because these are made of plastic. You can over tighten and break them. Once it's loosened up with enough of the tool, I can grab it and do it by hand. Now we're ready to go ahead and add some coolant. Now another cool tool you can use for adding coolant are these coolant funnels. They got different adapters for hooking up to each one of the radiators on different cars. Got a little stopper so you can actually control how much goes in there. Now we can add our 50-50 mix. This case has got 10-year, 150,000 coolant. Now I can actually control how much goes in. And as you're filling it up, you're going to pay attention to the bleeder there to see if any coolant starts coming out. If it does, wait a few seconds till you got a good steady flow and then shut it. Again, don't over tighten it. So now that we've got the bleeder shut, we've topped off the radiator, we've got the cap back on, we want to run the engine for a while. Let that thermostat open, cycle a couple of times. Then we'll let it cool off, we'll check the coolant level bottle, and we may actually open up the bleeder one more time. So for now, we're going to temporarily reinstall the air inlet. Don't forget to plug in your air intake temp sensor. Make sure it's fully seated too. There you go. No clamps need to be tightened, no bolts need to be installed. Just make sure the hose isn't nowhere near the fan. Now we're ready to go ahead and start the engine, let it warm up. So now we've let it run long enough for the thermostat to open and it's cooled down completely. We go ahead and open up the cap. Again, be careful. It's got to be cold when opening so you don't get burnt. We're just going to top it off. If we need to, we'll check the bleeder one more time. Now that all the air is out the system, we're ready to permanently reinstall the air inlet. Don't forget your sensor. All you gotta do is tighten down the clamps on both sides. You've got the hose you've got to attach here. And the two 10mm bolts, which I recommend hand tightening. So if you had your upper engine cover removed and you still got it, go ahead and reinstall that. At this point, we've bled all the air out of the system. We just need to wash everything off, get the residual coolant from where that thermostat bleed was open. We filled up the neck and when we opened the drain or took the hose off. So a good hosing down won't hurt. Just give it back to the customer the way they brought it to you. So hopefully after watching this video, you now know what you need to do if you ever have to replace a thermostat in a Jeep Wrangler with a 3.6 liter. Plus all the little tips and tricks I kind of gave you along the way. If you liked the video, please give it a big thumbs up on YouTube. Don't forget you can find me on Facebook and Instagram. If you got any comments or suggestions about anything you saw in today's video, or maybe a suggestion for a future video, leave something in the comments below. Also, if you shop on Amazon, which everybody does, scroll down into the description. You will find a link. Click on that. Make that your Amazon homepage, and anything that you buy whatsoever will help support this channel. Once again, everybody, thanks for watching.